Hey everybody, let's jump into our final section of the course, which is Reconstructing a Society. Essentially, it's about social change and social movements. So, all throughout this course, we've been talking a lot about social structures, institutions, organizations, and we often talk about them in a way that sounds kind of stagnant, but in reality, our society, our larger social structures, they're constantly changing or evolving, and that change in society is not the exception. It is the rule. Now, change happens through various ways. It can happen through individual action, but a way that we're going to look at a lot, especially with what's going on right now with the Black Lives Matter movement that are taking over the nation, is around collective action and how collective action can bring about rapid change or sometimes slower change, but can bring about change and does. Now we can see how the change is happening, and change has happened in our education system. When the education system was desegregated, but then when our education system continues to evolve now around things like school choice or tech prep, career prep, college prep, that kind of stuff. The education system is changing, and there's various forces why that is. Our economy is constantly changing. The structure of families and the family's role in society evolves and changes to these things as well. Now, in the past, societies tend to change more slowly, and that's not the case anymore. Change now is more fast-paced than it's ever been, and this is a great example we can see right now. So hopefully you all have been keeping up with or been participating in the protests and social movements, the Black Lives Matter movements in response initially to the death of George Floyd, but in response to the array of Black Americans and people of color being killed by law enforcement that were sworn to protect and serve these individuals. And it started off as a movement around these deaths, around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, but it's grown into a movement for more larger systemic change. Like, we're now using the term systemic racism in just our everyday lexicon, which is exciting. But as I mentioned in the race section, if we're going to use it, we didn't need to know what it actually means, how to interrogate it, and how to dismantle those structures that perpetuate it. Now, to think about, though, the speed of change, look at what's happening with this movement. So this movement, it's been happening now for a couple weeks. And in those couple weeks, there has been massive change happening quickly. There's already federal legislation proposed to reform policing. You're seeing local departments have conversations in which they're rethinking public safety. You're having states in Richmond and Virginia being example of taking down Confederate monuments and these relics of white supremacy and the Confederacy. And so that change is happening really quickly, quicker than we've ever seen it. And on one hand, you could argue, well, this is new, but in reality, the Black Lives Matter movement has existed for years, but the change is happening. More change is already happening quicker than it did post Ferguson and post Baltimore, and a lot of that is because of years of hard work of these activists, and these activists not only taking to the streets and bringing attention to racial injustice, but then putting in years of work of preparing on gathering data on police killings, gathering data on systemic injustice, trying to implement their recommendations, come up with recommendations that are data driven. And now all of a sudden we're in this unique time in history where we've got more attention than ever on this issue, and people collectively willing to dismantle these structures. But not only is there just a call for action, but there are recommendations, data-driven recommendations that's been worked on by leaders for years that are now being handed to mayors and to policymakers and legislators and saying, you want to make a difference? Here's how we do it. And these are specific recommendations. And not only did this movement grow quickly, and you can think through how social media is a big driver in the growth of not only the movement in Minneapolis, but among essentially all big and mid-sized cities and even smaller in the U.S. and internationally, but how even change this message is getting to policymakers and leaders, and they're actually implementing with it. They're not just playing lip service. Sometimes, playing lip service, but they're actually trying to implement policy changes, legislative changes, and it's a big deal. This change is fast-paced, and that is one of the a fascinating element of this current social movement, along with everything else that's going on. Now, Within these social movements, there's three different types: reform, counter, and revolutionary movements. Reform movements are the ones you're going to think of most common. And this is when there's a movement to change some feature of society, but not overturn it altogether. That is what the current Black Lives Matter movement, they are trying to change the criminal justice system, trying to change structures and laws and policies that have historically and continue to discriminate against people of color in this country. However, you're not seeing for a complete upending of the whole democratic system in the U.S. Same way the civil rights movement wanted change to the structures that already existed. Hey, we need to change this to give everyone opportunities. However, we're not trying to upend this whole system. And that's kind of, Me Too is the same way. The Me Too movement is trying to upend the whole democratic system, or all major social institutions, but trying to give victims a voice and have victims being treated fairly and safely through the sexual victimization process, especially when it comes to the court system, when those cases are reported. Now, counter movements are not trying to change society, but reverse changes that are happening. Very much the alt-right movement, the white nationalist movement, most famously the one that happened in Charlottesville. There was a call to roll back progressive changes that have been made for the white nationalist movement. These increased opportunities for people of color. They not only do they resent, they want to get rid of those changes. They want to preserve monuments and relics to white supremacy, not to actually make progress and tear them down with more proper monuments and statues. And so those are the kind of counter movements that are trying to prevent change. The Christian right also, for example, has a lot of their focus politically is around gay marriage and abortion. And as progress and change has been made, they're trying to often reverse that, whether it be trying to ban abortion altogether or at least cut it out at the state level or undercut it, because they are opposed to the changes that were made by these earlier movements. Now, revolutionary movements, they're the most extreme. That is complete overhaul of a governing system. The most famous one, that you all are familiar with is the American Revolution. The American Revolution didn't say, hey, British, we just want to change some of the laws that you're doing. We don't like them, or some of the taxation policies. However, the American Revolution was built upon overturning the system of British rule that existed to form a new democratic form of government. And that's what a revolutionary movement does. Now, social movements, there's a lot of elements that make them up. They tend to exist because of some recognition of uneven resource distribution. And they begin to lose faith in the systems that exist, and the system lose legitimacy. But also, social movements, especially those that are the most effective social movements, have some kind of ideology, some kind of coherent set of beliefs and values and ideas that the group organizes around and justifies their existence. And this is really important because this helps frame the issue in moral terms, define the entrance, identify who supports this movement, who does not, but also not only provide a sense of the goals, but actually have the goals ready and have ways for those goals to be implemented. And that an ideology can be key for keeping the movement together, having a coherent message, and not just keeping it sustained, but also getting into those levers of power and making the change as necessary. So if you have a movement where it feels like it's all over the place and not focused around a particular ideology, it often weakens the movement or allows for those trying to undercut the movement easy avenues to which to begin to undercut that. Now, within what makes a social movement successful, organization is absolutely key. And this is interesting because, social movements, often feel like they happen organically. People see these injustices. They watch the video of George Floyd being killed, and people get upset and take to the streets to voice, bring a voice to the oppression that's long existed and just has been once again encapsulated in this horrific video. And so they seem organic, but organization is absolutely key to sustain a movement and actually see its goals be implemented and change. And so if you have organization, one, it helps you acquire the resources you need, but it also helps you gain attention, media attention, because media attention is key for growing the movement and giving the movement a sense of legitimacy. And it also helps to expand ranks. And so bringing in more people, bringing in more supporters, and also you get into this given this push and pull of the movements that are most long-term, that have most long-term impact. Often they have some kind of element. They form into formal groups, whether it be political action committees, whether it be lobbying groups that are close or have the ear of power brokers, of legislators. And that's key because that helps you get the goals of your movement into the power makers, into the people that can actually change it through legislation, through policy, through law. Now, this can be dangerous too, though, because as you become more formal, you can have different factions within the movement that say, "Hey, I think we're being too conservative on this, or I think we're not being pragmatic enough on this." So that can tear apart a movement, and also you risk becoming a part of the system that you were seeking to change. And that's happened with plenty of movements before, where they organize, they become an official, official holder of some type of power in the governing structure. But then, rather than keeping demanding for the change they want, they become more pragmatic. They become more operators in the system, and you see that a lot, especially as activists try to translate or transfer into academia, into becoming a politician, and these other realms. As you see this, it's hard to make that transition, saying, "Oh, I'm still an activist at heart, but now I'm just becoming, operating within the structures, not changing the structures that I originally protested against." And of course, I mentioned before, with this organization, ability to communicate with your members is key. And as you want to keep growing, but it really helps if you have a common, coherent message going on, like you're hearing right now. If you go to any protest in the country, you're probably going to hear things like defund the police. Well, a lot of people we're now having these conversations. This conversation has been going on for a while, and essentially, in the criminology world, the conversation is, how do we rethink public safety? Like, what does public safety look like, going forward? How should we properly allocate resources to social services, to education, to substance abuse, to mental health, and have a more holistic approach to public safety than just law enforcement? And so those conversations have been happening. And so, but it's been encapsulated in this defund the police motto. And so I know a lot of people that have not participated in the movement or have not been keeping up with the research are probably saying, like, what are they talking about? Defund the police? What does that even look like? Where did this come from? However, if you have an organization that can get that message out, all of a sudden that message is now being painted on streets. It's being chanted at all these protests. And so now I'm shocked that this has made its way into mainstream media, people having legitimate conversations around what does a rethinking of local community safety look like in 2020. And that is originating because of this statement of defunding the police, which has brought a lot of attention to it. And all of a sudden now we're having a legitimate conversation, not just in academic circles, not just in activist circles, but in the mainstream and political circles and policymaking circles around, okay, what does this look like? Maybe, we should have always been putting this funding toward X resource or toward substance abuse or toward mental health or toward education. That would have had more of a long-term impact on crime and safety anyways. And so that's really key, is being able to communicate to members, hey, this is what we want to bring attention to. We should do it in this way, but also be willing to have that conversation. If somebody pushes you on it, what do you mean by that? Well, here's what I actually mean. And that is key. Also, social media really helps this a lot. Social media, of course, helps to not just spread awareness of the movement, and so bring in those individuals that have, that believe this as well, and they've been looking for some way to get a part of it or didn't know how. But it also helps validate the movement, because all of a sudden, it doesn't feel like this Black Lives Matter movement is going on right now. Social media is helping validate it and show, hey, not only is this movement important, but this is being shared. These views, this is not some kind of fringe idea. We're seeing millions of Americans take to the streets, and you can see it on these videos on social media. You can see all the influential thinkers that are behind this movement and behind the message, and it's helping further validate that movement, giving credence and making it more likely that that movement translates into real change. Now, for this week's blog, I think this will be a good blog for you all to wrap up the class, and I want you to think through 5 social movements that, give me 5 that you can think of, and I want you to rank them 1 to 5 according to your perceptions about them meeting their goals or not. Not whether you agree with the movement or not, but whether those movements achieve the goals they set out to achieve. And then I want you to ask yourself, using some of the concepts we just talked about, like resource mobilization, opportunity structure, becoming too bureaucratic or not bureaucratic enough, and ideology, for each of those 5, use those terms to think through, why was one more successful than the other? Or why do I perceive one as more successful than the others? Once you do that, you'll be done with your last blog of the semester. I hope you have enjoyed all of these little short snippets and lecture videos. Please continue to read all the lecture and video notes, read your textbooks. But any questions you have, reach out to me. And I can make any other videos to help clarify things or just converse with you one-on-one to help answer any questions you have. But I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for all your hard work this semester, and I can't wait to read your journal entries that will be coming soon. Have a great day.